Hello and welcome to the Poke Report. I'm Jace Andrews.
And I'm Karsten Melton. There was a lot of madness in the first week of the NCAA tournament, and we have all the updates for you right here, including a deep dive into the Big 12 and our predictions for the rest of this year's tournament. Don't go away.
The men's March Madness tournament began early last week with the Sweet 16 beginning tonight. While most games didn't begin until last Thursday, play-in games began Tuesday. The craziest of the four being on Wednesday. Rutgers versus Notre Dame, the Scarlet Knights were back and forth with the Fighting Irish the entire game, ultimately forcing double overtime. Now, Notre Dame did win that game 89-87, and I can't tell you I've seen a more back-and-forth game, especially one that went into double overtime.
It was a really good game that had, just about everything you'd want in college basketball, including twice it seemed that a team was down to the final shot in each overtime. It was a really well-contested game. It was one of those games where you wish someone didn't have to lose.
Yeah, it stinks because it was a play-in game, so obviously one of them doesn't technically get into the tournament, which is really tough because I felt like they both deserved to, and I think that was proved by Notre Dame going on and beating Alabama in the next round, which we'll talk about in a second. But both of these teams just played outstandingly. I mean, the main guys for Rutgers, Caleb McConnell had a double-double, 23 points, 11 rebounds, and he played 48 of the 50 minutes. 48 of 50 is literally that's almost a game plus 2 overtimes. That doesn't really happen, especially in college basketball.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of players. I mean, you saw a lot of players for Notre Dame as well. It was really incredible to see Mike Bray's team, will themselves to the win and get the last second bucket, the layup. But what was interesting was in double overtime, you saw Notre Dame get the layup with about 2 seconds to go, I would say, and you saw Rutgers just go ahead and go for it from a full court. You could see Coach Pikiel calling timeout. One of the Rutgers players was calling timeout as well. And the refs didn't call it. So, we could have had a very different outcome if the timeout had been granted. But I'm like you. I do think that no matter who won that game, they were going to beat Alabama.
Yeah,
because Alabama to end the year looked horrible.
Yeah.
At the beginning of the year, they were a 3 seed. At the end of the year, they were a play-in team, it felt like.
They just did not perform well. But looking at the Big 12, unfortunately, our Cowboys were not able to compete due to the 1-year NCAA ban, but the other teams have done exceptionally across the board. The one team, though, that didn't live up to expectations was the reigning champions, the Baylor Bears. They had a really good game against Norfolk State, looked primed. That was a lot better than their game last year against Hartford in the 1-16 game. They looked a lot better, but it just all fell apart against a very sharp-shooting UNC team. They did come back from 25 points, but ultimately lost 93-86 in overtime. That was probably one of the craziest games I've seen from a 1-8 game in a long time.
I think it was just one of the craziest games, especially of this tournament, and it was to start the second round, which was incredible. I mean, you look at this Baylor team, defending national champions. They returned a lot of guys. They lose Jonathan Tchamwa, which was a big worry. But, you look at the North Carolina team, it's a good team. Armando Bacot down low is incredible. He's going to be a really good draft pick. Brady Manick, transfer from Oklahoma, was also exceptional until he got ejected. But, North Carolina built a 25-point lead. They were a good team this year. They were deserving of that 8 seed in a very difficult ACC, which had, Duke, somehow Virginia Tech, and then everyone else. But, give Baylor credit. They came back down 25. The Brady Manick ejection probably did help a bit.
I think that was the big thing. I mean, he got ejected at 10:08. So 10:08 left, and UNC was up at that time 25, 67, 42. From there, Baylor finishes the game on a 38-13 run, which forced overtime. But the big shot was by the transfer from Arizona, James Akinjo. He had the and-one layup going straight up on the board with about 30 seconds to go. And that really gave Baylor confidence that they could come back and win this. But in overtime, you could tell they just looked gassed. They had people fouling out. I mean, Flo Thamba, Matthew Meyer, both out. Not to mention when you're already short with Jonathan Tchamwa, along with LJ Cryer not playing for the Bears. They were just hurt, and unfortunately, I think that was just their demise.
Yeah, they were, but what was incredible with Brady Manick, he got ejected, what did you say, about 10 minutes?
10-8. Yeah.
He still had 26 points.
Exactly.
He was incredible. Armando Bacot, 15 points, 16 rebounds, was absolutely awesome. But R.J. Davis from North Carolina,
Insane.
30 points, 6 assists, 5 rebounds. He's a huge key to that Carolina offense. I mean, I really like Armando Bacot. I think he's a really great player. But R.J. Davis is a big key. That's why I think the UCLA UNC game is going to be so incredible.
And we'll get into more of that later.
Absolutely. But it was a great game. Another Big 12 team that has been eliminated is TCU. They were neck and neck with Arizona all game long, even forcing the game into overtime, but unfortunately fell to the Wildcats. That was the perfect ending to this first 2 games, wasn't it?
That game was just back. I don't know what to call that game. I mean, they had the dunk that didn't count by about a half second. Arizona did win by 5 points in overtime, so I can't really say TCU was much deserving because in overtime they really kind of fell flat.
But let's be clear, both teams probably should have made it to the Sweet 16. That was a great TCU
this
team.
year, there has been so many games where I've just thought both teams playing each other should have gone to the next round. But to be fair, there's also a couple games where I'm like, why are you even here yet? So, but
the Indiana St. Mary's game
yes,
comes
that
to
was
mind.
a rough game. I don't know. Indiana just anyway.
Yeah.
But so TCU was really good against Seton Hall. 69-42 was that final score. And they had a little bit of a tougher challenge, obviously. But TCU played their heart out.
Oh,
3
absolutely.
starters with 20-plus points. They were down 67-58 with 7:52 left, and Arizona had just gone on an 8-1 run after they cut it to 1. And they somehow fought back. I just don't understand. But the dunk at the end of the game, I want to look close at that.
Mm-hmm.
I know, let me see your
Absolutely.
opinion.
Absolutely.
Do you think that was a foul on the steal?
Yes.
Okay.
I thought, he's at half court and, watching Mike Miles drive along half. First of all, I thought the play call was iffy from Jamie Dixon. I know he could have probably done better than that, and he probably knows that as well. Because, they tried to get the screen off of Eddie Lampkin. Then you're getting double teamed by Benedict Mathurin. Should have been Player of the Year finalist. Driving along, I thought Mathurin hip checked him. I really thought he did. But, I mean, the officiating this tournament has been less than ideal, let's say. But this was a great. It doesn't matter that happened, thankfully, for either team because the clock stopped for about half a second, and then the dunk missed it. Excuse me, by about 0.2 of a second. Yeah, but I mean, Eddie Lampkin, 20 and 14, Mike Miles, 20. Chris O'Bannon, 23 for TCU. They had 4 guys in double figures with Miller as well, but Arizona was just too good.
I mean, it's hard when you have 2 guys for Arizona, a 6'6" guy, Benedict Marthon, who scored 26, and 7'1" Christian Koloko, who scored 30. You just cannot beat when you have those guys that tight and scoring like that.
Well, I mean, Koloko had 28 and 12. Mathurin dropped 30 points, had that incredible putback dunk. Basically, that won the game in overtime. But I mean, Koloko was Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year. Mathurin was Pac-12 Player of the Year and was a semifinalist for the Naismith Player of the Year award. So that's a really good Arizona team under Tommy Lloyd. That's a great team, and they're going to be really good for the rest of the tournament. That game against Houston is going to be really interesting.
Well, we're going to move in now to the other teams in the Big 12. So first, let's take a look at Texas Tech. They had a fantastic year going 12-6 in conference, 25-9 overall, and they performed well, reaching that Big 12 title game and now getting to the Sweet 16 after they defeated Montana State and Notre Dame. And now they're going to have to face probably their biggest challenge yet, and that's Duke and Coach K. Now, they have played Duke one time before, and that was when they were ranked 12 facing they were undefeated facing Duke in the Garden. And a little trivia for you, who do you think was the leading scorer in that game? I'll give you a hint. It was from Duke, 2018 in the Garden.
2018?
2018 in the Garden.
God, was it? It wasn't Grayson Allen, was it?
Nope.
I don't know. What do you got for me, man?
Zion Williamson.
Really?
Zion Williamson.
That's
was the leading
right.
scorer at 18 points.
That's right. I forgot about that.
But Texas Tech has been very key throughout the year, and I think it's going to be probably one of the most interesting games to watch. But they've played very solid in their first 2 games, Montana State. Notre Dame was a little bit more of a defensive showing, but they played well.
Yeah, they really Notre Dame was up, late in that game, and it was Tech's defense that stifled Notre Dame. A little bit of interesting play calling from Mike Bray. Yeah. But, this Texas Tech team, they thrive on their defense. I mean, we saw it, in Oklahoma State's final game that was against Texas Tech. 53, 52, something like that, 52, 51. It was such a low-scoring game. This is a Tech team that, averages about 3 blocks a game, 8 steals a game, which is incredible. they don't have a lot of guys averaging double figures. Bryson Williams averaging about 14 points per game. Terrence Shannon, I would say probably their best scoring threat on offense, only 10.5. Kevin O'Banner, 10, the transfer from Oral Roberts. Even Kevin McCullers just under 10, about 9.9, which we'll say that's 10. But you look at the Tech team, they rely a lot on their defense. And I think it's a matchup problem for Duke because they're so young.
And the last thing I think I'll mention on Texas Tech is you talk about double digits, and now they kind of don't have a lot. They have had 6 different players score double digits in the tournament. So that's kind of a big thing. So moving over to Kansas. Now, it's not much you haven't heard, Kansas being in the Sweet 16 for what seems to be the billionth time in a row. Now, in my personal opinion, when you have the Wooden Award winner and Ochai Agbaji, I think that's my winner, you obviously should be in the Sweet 16. I will say, though, that their surprising part of it is that their top scorer in both games, Remy Martin. He's been off the bench, scoring very well, and they went through Greg McDermott like it was nothing at a great Creighton team. I know they had some struggles, but they really had control of the game all the way through.
Creighton battled back, though. That was a very good showing from Creighton. But it feels like Remy Martin, to use a 2K reference, he basically just gained another level.
Yes.
He used his VC. He used his VC at a great time. And the Arizona State transfer dropped 20 points, as you said, against Creighton, with 7 rebounds. But, this team goes through Agbaji, National Player of the Year finalist, but also an underrated player for Kansas is Christian Brown.
Brown, yes.
Brown, averaging about 14.5 points per game. He's had a very good season. It's a good Kansas team. It's not one of Bill Self's strongest teams talent-wise, but as a team, I think this is probably one of his best teams.
I'll say this. They probably have the most collective basketball knowledge I've seen in the Big 12 in a while.
Oh, absolutely. And, to quote Bob Huggins, what he said at the Big 12 tournament press conference, if they don't win, he ought to be fired, is what he said, because that's how good this team is.
So the next 2 teams we'll look at, Iowa State and Texas. Iowa State, the Big 12 Cinderella this year. They moved on. They defeated Wisconsin in that second round of 32, and they've had 3 guys really that have been their main scores in these 2 games. So the first game, it was Isaac Brockington and Tyrese Hunter that accounted for a combined 42 of the team's 49 points. And in the second game, it was Gabe Kashler who had 22 against Wisconsin. They're a very good scheme, and I'm just gonna pat myself on the back here. I called this in our bracketology show, saying that Iowa State would be the Cinderella. They'll face the Miami team, so we'll see kind of how that goes.
Yeah, I had Iowa State taking down LSU. I felt like that was easy, especially because of the coaching change. But as you said, Isaiah Brockington, probably I think outside of Ochai Agbaji, best player in the Big 12. Tyrese Hunter is doing really well as well. Then if Gabe Kelscher can have as good of a game as he has been against Wisconsin, if he can do that against Miami, this team can make a really good run.
Moving over to Texas, they had a tough loss, especially against Purdue, when they had 46 free throws. I'm not going to get too much on that because that's just so much to get into. Chris Beard's first season comes to an end, and he doesn't make it farther than the team he left, Tech. Interesting thing, but it is Texas, so what can you expect? And then one more team I do want to take a quick look at, a future Big 12 member, Houston. Now, they have been playing very well. They went to the Final Four last year. They've looked very good this year. Had a couple weird losses in February. They got swept by Memphis in their
That's
AAC.
a good Memphis team.
Exactly.
That's a really good Memphis team.
Well, and you saw that against Gonzaga.
Absolutely.
So
that team,
we'll have to see. But the game against Illinois played very well, and I don't know. I think they got a shot to maybe go to the championship game this year.
That was dominant from Houston over Illinois. I mean, you look at some of their guys, and they lost their leading scorer, if you can believe that, back in February. So this is a really good team. Kelvin Sampson, Coach of the Year in the American. You know what's interesting? They beat Illinois, the 4 seed. It's the first time that Houston has beat a single-digit seed since they made the Final Four in 1984. Jeez. I mean, it's incredible. That Houston-Arizona game, I can't wait.
It's going to be a good game.
I cannot wait for that game. Now, one team that really busted a lot of brackets, not as much my own, I only had Kentucky losing the second round, is the St. Peter's Peacocks out of Jersey City. Now, their motto is to strut up, and they've done a lot of that and a lot of shutting up big teams. The Peacocks beat 2-seed Kentucky in the first round in overtime. Final score of that was 85-79. Now, a lot of people are saying, how far can St. Peter's really go? I mean, they're playing a really good Purdue team with Jaden Ivey. But Kentucky has Oscar Tshiebwe, a Player of the Year finalist, and John Calipari. And then they beat Murray State, who won 30 games this year.
Yeah.
Like, this is incredible what we've seen from St. Peter's.
And I think the crazier thing is a lot of people like yourself were predicting Murray State to take out Kentucky. Well, instead, St. Peter's did the job for itself and took out Murray State too, and they're in the Sweet 16.
I was very sad about that one.
But I mean, 85-79 to overtime against a really, really good Kentucky team, and then you talked about a 10-point win over Murray State. I mean, they were very much in control of that game for a majority of that game. They won by 10, but it felt like the Peacocks had control of it for a long, long time.
Now, I will say, when you look at the differentials of the budgets, St. Peter's, their entire athletic budget is $7.5 million. John Calipari gets paid $9 million a year at Kentucky. So it's really incredible to just see. This is probably as big, if not bigger, than when UMBC beat Virginia because of the scope of how small St. Peter's is.
I think what's crazy is if you look at the money spending, St. Peter's, Kentucky spends 12 times more on basketball than St. Peter's does.
Yeah.
St. Peter's University is a street.
Yeah.
St. Peter's basketball stadium is almost high school-esque. Not to do anything to them.
Hey! Don't talk down on Run Baby Run Arena, all right?
Hey, but they have been amazing, and I think their leader. I know he's come off the bench. Doug Eddard. He's had back-to-back games with double digits off the bench. 20 against Kentucky, 13 against Murray State. And the funniest thing is, you want to know how much this tournament means to athletes?
Absolutely.
Today, he got an NIL deal with Buffalo Wild Wings.
Of course he did.
Literally a week ago at this time, no one knew his name. Now he's going to be known everybody, and he's something else. I mean, his facial expression is probably the best part of March Madness.
I mean, it's like, Max Asmus last year for Oral Roberts basically became, the darling. It's Doug Eater. It's been absolutely incredible to see St. Peter's. There were a lot of other upsets in the second round, including Miami over Auburn, which a lot of people are saying this Miami team can make a run.
Yeah, well, Miami has been a very good team. I mean, they took out Auburn with 79-61. They really dominated.
It was
the
a
game.
30-1 difference in the fast break points between Miami and Auburn. It was crazy.
But
unbelievable.
I think the thing that they did well, that a lot of people hadn't done well against Auburn, is they made Jabari Smith the only guy on the team that could score. He scored 10 points, which is still below his average, but he had 14 rebounds. They made it to where he had to do everything because they were not going to let anybody else score, which was an interesting strategy because you think, okay, usually when you're playing a big team with one good player, you're going to go after that one player and stop him. Miami did the opposite. They said, we're going to let you do everything. Everybody else, they're not going to do anything. And it worked out perfectly.
It was a game that I think, a lot of people thought Auburn could make a run, and they probably should have made a run. Jabari Smith's going to be a top 5 pick.
Yes.
Without a doubt. It's a game they probably should have won. Another upset was Michigan taking out both Colorado State and Tennessee. Tennessee, everyone was saying, they were like too low seeded. They probably should have been a 2 seed after winning the SEC tournament. And they lose in the second round to Michigan. Shades of Oklahoma State last year being unfairly seeded too low, then losing in the second round to a double-digit seeded team.
Yeah, and to me, they just ran into the Hunter Dickinson bus. I mean, 48 points in the first 2 games of the tourney as a center.
He's incredible.
He is really incredible. But I swear how it's funny how the one big team that everybody thought should not be in the tournament is one of the 2 left with Michigan and Purdue. So, welcome to March, everybody. That's
By the way, the Big Ten, they got 9 teams in the tournament. 2 made it to the Sweet 16. As many Big 12 teams that made it to the Sweet 16, that's how many Big Ten teams won in the first weekend. In the first round.
I will say,
which is kind of hilarious.
It's very funny, but to say something with Michigan, they found the guy. I think Juwan Howard is that man in Michigan. He has had some troubles this season with just certain things like we won't be mentioned, but ultimately he is a great coach.
Absolutely.
A very, very, very good coach.
Absolutely. Now, there were a lot of upsets. Absolutely. I mean, you can't have St. Peter's, Miami, North Carolina, and Iowa State in the Sweet 16 without there being upsets. UConn was a popular pick to get to the Sweet 16. They went down to New Mexico State. The big one, I think, everyone was saying, dark horse to the Final Four, Iowa. How about Richmond? Having to be the 6th seed in the Atlantic 10, and just they had to win the conference tournament just to get to the big dance. And then they took down Iowa in the first round. I mean, it was a great game from that's a good Richmond team.
I will say this. I think this is a little bit of karma for all the Dayton fans because they were all talking, oh, yeah, we would have been in there if Richmond didn't do that. We would have been in there. What does Richmond do? They go ahead and say, fine, we'll just win against Iowa. So
Jacob Gilliard, dropped 24, and Burton, 18 points, 11 rebounds. That's a good team.
Before we get into our Sweet 16 analysis, let's take a look at how the Power 5 conferences are doing in this year's Big Dance. So the conference records go as said. Big 12 is in the lead at 10-3. ACC 8-2 right behind them. The Big 10, they have a 9-7 records with just 2 teams left. Pac-12 is at 4-1, and the SEC is 4-5 with just 1 team left, being Arkansas, and most likely will get taken out against Gonzaga either tonight. So
yeah, I mean it's incredible because the whole year we were talking about how the Big 10 was the best conference. Best conference. Big 12 was probably the best conference. They absolutely have an incredible defense, and all 6 Big 12 teams that made the dance got to the second round.
Well, and I will say this, it could have been better. You talk about the Purdue-Texas game, Texas very easily could have won that game.
Probably should have won it if you think about it.
If you think about the free throws, TCU took Arizona, which is the number 2 team in the nation, to overtime. There could have been a foul call in the last one, not much to talk about there, but I think you can get a whole soapbox on that.
Oh, yeah.
But everybody for the Big 12 performed very well. The one exception, of course, being Baylor, but I think they got bit by the reigning champions. Because if you look at it, a reigning champion has not gone to the Sweet 16 only once in the past 5 years.
It's been a long time.
And only twice in the past 10 years.
It's been a long time.
So it's something.
In fact, you can go all the way back to when Florida was a back-to-back champion, and then the next year they didn't even qualify for the tournament. Going back to then, no reigning champion has made, I think, the Elite Eight. I believe I saw this on CBS Sports. The furthest they've made is the Sweet 16.
I think that was UNC after they won the next year.
They beat Gonzaga and then the next year. Yeah, I believe.
16.
Yes, absolutely. So it's so bizarre, how this season turned out, because you thought that Gonzaga and Arizona were kind of better than the rest, and now this tournament has proved everyone sucks.
Yes.
Nobody's good.
Nobody.
We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what we're doing, all right? We don't know what's going on. I think that's the takeaway.
Welcome to March. I think we have this takeaway almost every March when we get there. But I think one thing that is kind of surprising, kind of not, is the ACC being 8-2. They're tied with the Big 12 with 3 teams left. And
Duke,
even
Miami.
on an off year for ACC, they still find a way to prove that they're the premier basketball conference.
Yeah, and I mean, you saw that wasn't a great. It was an okay Duke team. Yes. I mean, losing in Coach K's last game to North Carolina was funny. Then losing in Coach K's last ACC game to Virginia Tech was also funny.
Very funny.
But I think it's a good Duke team. Don't get me wrong. Paulo Banchero is going to be a top 5 pick. He's going to be very good in the league. You look at that team; they've got a lot of talent. Miami was the surprising one. I don't think North Carolina was super surprising.
Not surprising. I'm just surprised that they played that well against Baylor.
I know.
I mean, R.J. Davis shot the lights out.
He did.
Brady Manick played an incredible game, especially when he was missing for 10 minutes of it.
Well, he knows Baylor, coming from OU. I felt like that definitely helped a lot. But, it's crazy. There was a huge gap between the top of the ACC. 2 was Duke. Then, what was it? Next highest 9 or 8, North Carolina. That was a huge gap of the top 2 teams. So it's good to see that.
And of course, we can't forget the top dogs, Gonzaga. They're from the West Coast Conference, and they are back to their old ways for what seems like the 3rd year in a row, right?
It's been quite a while. They have made the Sweet 16, I believe, 8 years in a row. Eight tournaments in a row is what I saw. And this is the year. They have to get it done. They have to get it done.
They're back again. I don't know if they'll finally get that championship trophy, but they defeated Georgia State 93-72 in the 1-16 game, and then took out Memphis 82-78. And you mentioned earlier, that Memphis team was a really good team.
That's a good team.
And they challenged Gonzaga for an entirety of that game. I have worries about the Zags. I will say I have my worries because if you look at the Memphis game, there was a really good point in that time where they were down by 10. It seemed like nobody could save them.
Down by 10 at halftime.
But Drew Timme and Andrew Nembhard came to the rescue. I mean, Nembhard, 23 points. And the big thing is he hit 6 key free throws in the final minute and a half, 2 minutes. I think they are going to reach the championship. I just don't know if we're going to have a repeat of the last 2 years and having a loss. I'm really interested to see them who they play, but I have good confidence they'll get there.
I think they have the perfect matchups to get out of their region with Arkansas and then either Tech or Duke. They've already beaten Tech. They lost to Duke earlier, but this is a different Gonzaga team. I mean, you talked about Drew Timme, Player of the Year in the conference. Chet Holmgren is a finalist for Defensive Player of the Year. He didn't look fantastic, but Drew Timme, he scored 21 of his 25 points in the second half. He turned it on. You know, this guy, he turned it on. Had a double-double, 25 and 14. Like you said, Andrew Nembhard, who I believe that's the key to that Gonzaga team. They run through Andrew Nembhard. He's going to be very good. But don't forget, Rasir Bolton, transfer from Iowa State, dropped 17 against Memphis. He's becoming another big part. So this is going to be very interesting to see who the Zags match up with in the second weekend.
Yeah, and I think it's crazy how they keep pushing in more talent. I mean, you talk about losing Jalen Suggs last year, which you thought would take a big hit. Chet Holmgren comes in and says, "No, we're fine." And he had an amazing game against Georgia State.
Oh, yeah.
Not as well against Memphis, but again, I think they sized him up a little bit better.
I think they had a better. I think they had a better matchup there down low, and that's a Memphis team that's going to be challenging Houston so much more next year. I think they probably will be a 5 seed next year at minimum because Penny Hardaway's for real, and that Memphis fan base has. Really, they're latching onto that Memphis team.
And we've been the bearer of this at Oklahoma State, but he's kind of cut and bit by the transfer bug. I mean, Musa Cissa was with him. He had a bunch of other players that were very good, but unfortunately just got bit.
Absolutely. Moving on into this weekend's game, there are some notable matchups that are including arguably the two most impressive teams in March Madness history, North Carolina Tar Heels versus the UCLA Bruins. This is the matchup of matchups when you talk about Blue Bloods.
Yes.
North Carolina, one of the premier programs. UCLA, one of the winning, these are two of the 5 winningest programs in college basketball history. And it's an 8-4 matchup.
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned it. Tournament Titans is the graphic that CBS put up.
Yes.
UNC has 52 appearances. UCLA has 49. Over 200 combined wins from these two teams. And together, they have 17 championships. 11 of those coming from UCLA, and it's going to be a very great game, but I'm going to bring up the sharpshooters first. R.J. Davis and Tiger Campbell. Those guys have been really shooting the lights out in this tournament. R.J. had almost, I would say arguably, one of the most impressive games in this year's March Madness so far, going for 30 points against Baylor along with 5 for 8 behind the arc at one point. He just really is a great shooter. And I think it's going to be a great matchup with him and Tiger Campbell, who has really shot well mid-range, behind the arc, down low. He's just been doing very well.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really good UCLA team because they basically brought back their whole squad from last year when they made the Final Four as a play-in team, which is still bizarre to see. And Akron held them very close. That was a very good game. That's a good Akron team. But then they took a St. Mary's team that throttled Indiana and 72-56 was the final score. They took them down because you've got Jaime Jaquez dropping 15. You got Johnny Juzang, 14 and 8. You know, I mean, he's done great. Tiger Campbell, as you were saying, had 16 points, was 8 for 8 from the free throw line. That's key there. And then Jules Bernard with 14 points. I would say this is probably UCLA's best chance to get to the Final Four. It's a good Pac-12 as well with Arizona, and they played a tremendous Pac-12 championship game against Arizona late Saturday night because it's on the West Coast. That's going to be a good game.
I will say this. I feel like we've said this a lot in the past couple minutes, but this is probably one of the most exciting matchups in the tournament.
Oh,
I think
100%.
we've said that 3 times in the show already.
I don't even care. It's awesome.
There's
It's awesome.
so many good matchups in this year's Sweet 16.
Absolutely.
I just can't believe it. I mean, and then there's just so many. Anyway, the Big 12 has 3 teams in the Sweet 16, tied most of any conference, as we mentioned earlier. Iowa State will be taking on Miami. Kansas will face off against Providence, and Texas Tech will play Coach K's Blue Devils. That's the game we mentioned earlier, and again, that's one of the other games we mentioned would be very, very, very interesting to watch. And I can't believe, though, we've gotten this far into this show, and we have not talked that much about Coach K's Blue Devils and his
Because
final
we have
trip to the Big
restraint.
Dance.
Because we have restraint, Jace. We have restraint. I mean, I know you want to talk about Coach K, and we can. I mean, he's one of the most legendary coaches of all time. But you have to think that's too much pressure on this very young team.
And I think that's why they lost that game to UNC at the end of the year, and probably why they lost to Virginia Tech at that ACC tournament.
But also Virginia Tech was on a roll.
They were, which is why I find it so surprising that they got taken down so easily by Texas in the tournament.
I think they were just a little gassed. They had time to rest, and it finally caught up with them. But they still played a good game. That's a good team.
Well,
but go ahead.
So Duke looked really good in the ACC tournament, as we mentioned. They defeated Michigan State in the round of 32, 85-76, and in a historic matchup. Coach K and Tom Izzo, probably two of the premier basketball coaches still coaching as of right now.
It was a good game.
But the Duke Blue Devils are a very complete team. They have a bunch of 5 stars as usual, and they just look like a real deal for what seems like the 4th year in a row. I'm interested to see how they match up against Texas Tech because I don't think their matchups point them well.
No, absolutely not. I think Tech, especially with Mark Adams, that's such a defensively oriented team that I think that it will be tough for Duke to match up well. That's going to be a great game for the Big 12. And we talked about Iowa State and Miami, a team we probably should talk about that we don't talk about too much. Providence. Ed Cooley, Coach of the Year finalist. This is a team that won the Big East for the first time ever. And it's an incredibly awesome story. This is a great story from Providence. You look at the team, they took down South Dakota State, who many were saying was a popular upset pick, was the 13-4 South Dakota State, who won 30 games in the Summit League, had an incredible season. And then they took on Richmond, who was on a high after beating Iowa, who many considered was a Final Four darling. Beat them by 20, almost 30 points, 79-51. Now they go ahead and take on Kansas. A Providence team that's beaten, high-quality teams in the Big East. It's a very good team under Ed Cooley, who's a great coach. I think he probably could deserve Coach of the Year. I think all the finalists this year deserve Coach of the Year. But this is going to be a very interesting game between KU and Providence.
Yeah, and I think it's one that everybody's probably not looking too much at in terms of high-quality opponents.
Exactly,
but
right.
It is going to be a very, very, very good game.
Absolutely.
So we can't forget America's underdog, the Peacocks. They'll be taking on Purdue, and man, oh man, they have reached the Sweet 16. They're one of just 3 teams to do it. Oral Roberts did it back last year, and then FGCU did it in 2013. Can they make it far? Because FGCU and Oral Roberts last year both lost in the Sweet 16 matchup. Can St. Peter's get it done against Purdue?
I don't know. I want to say yes, but this is a good Purdue team. They're led by a projected top 5 pick, Jaden Ivey, and then Zach Edey down low, who looks like he's the tallest person in college basketball, and the 6th man of the year in the Big Ten, Travion Williams. I mean, Williams against Texas, 22 points off the bench. Jaden Ivey had 18, Edey with the double-double, 11 points and 10 rebounds. But this is a Purdue team that they have this is Final Four or bust for this Purdue team because Coach Painter and the Boilermakers, they need to get there to the Final Four because they've had so high expectations. They got to get there.
Well, and I think I'll compare Purdue to their football team in a little bit of they've won the high caliber games, but they've also lost some of the lower games in the Big Ten. I mean, now I will say the Big Ten was just a mosh pit of good teams that could really beat each other any other day.
It was a gauntlet.
Yes. But I think one name you didn't mention is Jaden Ivey. He had 18 against Texas and 22 against Yale, and that Ivey family is a Sweet 16 darling. The mom, the head coach of Notre Dame, shout out to her. The Notre Dame women beat the Sooners 108-64. And from everybody here at Oklahoma State, we thank you for taking out OU in that tournament.
And as someone who really likes Notre Dame, thank you as well. But also, and a really interesting fact about that game, that was the first time in men's or women's tournament history that a team seated lower beat the higher seeded team by 40 or more points. First time that's ever happened, and they did it on home floor for OU in the Lloyd Noble Center. But going back to this Purdue team, Jaden Ivey, top 5 overall pick. He's right now projected to get drafted 4th by the Thunder, which I think would be cool.
Be really good.
That'd be cool. But like you said, he's been incredible. Edey, big man down low. You got to figure out how to stop him. And I've been talking to some people who said, how is St. Peter's going to match up with Zach Edey down low? Well, they beat Oscar Tshiebwe at Kentucky, who is Player of the Year finalist, is just as big of a force. So it's going to be a good game. I want St. Peter's to win so bad.
I think one last thing we talked about Purdue is they move very, very well. Mm-hmm. They're a very well-moving team, and they don't necessarily have a weakness. Mm-hmm. But their one weakness is inconsistent in their shooting abilities, because it seems like when they're on, they're on. When they're off, they're off. And I think that goes for a lot of teams, but especially with Purdue, because they feed off each other. And a team that I have never seen before, that they feed off each other so well. And it's really, it's crazy to see. But again, Texas really could have beat that team.
Absolutely.
Texas really could have.
Absolutely.
If they went for the 40 free throws.
Absolutely. I do want to talk. We haven't talked about one team yet, and I want to bring them up because they're also a good team and probably can make a Final Four run as well, and that's Villanova, another Big East team. Big East got 2 teams in. It's pretty incredible. They could have gotten 3 with Creighton. It's a good conference.
Big East is probably, in terms of basketball, Power 6. They're that 6th conference behind it. Yeah,
absolutely. You talk about Power 6 in football with the American. Well, it's the Big East in basketball. I mean, and they're led, of course, by Colin Gillespie, who's I think's been there for a decade. It feels like.
I think try 2 decades.
Dropped 20 points against Ohio State, and you look at Samuels with 17 points as well and 8 boards. It's a good team. They're going up against Michigan. It's a good matchup for Villanova, I think.
I think that's, again, there's so many good matchups that I feel like a lot of them are going to get overlooked, and that's another one. We talked about Kansas and Providence. Villanova and Michigan could be a very good game, especially down low. We talked about Hunter Dickinson. He is going to have to really, really produce, because Villanova is a 3-point shooting team, and they're going to make Michigan score. They're going to make them score.
I mean, it's such an underrated game. We waited this long to even mention it.
Exactly.
By the way, there's a player on Villanova. Remember Archie Diacono? For Villanova to help Chris Jenkins win it all. His little brother's on the team. That's got to mean something. It's got to mean something.
It has to.
It has to mean something. So, we've talked about all the teams. We've given you a little bit of insight. Now it's time for predictions. Jace, I will let you go first. Give me your Final Four. Give me your natty matchup. And who's cutting down the nets in New Orleans.
I'll tell you what. I'll start with my Final Four. I'll let you do your Final Four, and we'll combine with the champion, because I think we're going to have a similar championship game at least.
Okay.
So in the Final Four, from the West, I'm going to have the Gonzaga Bulldogs, and I really don't think it's close. We talked about the Duke and Texas Tech game, and it's a great matchup, but I really don't think it's going to mean much, to be honest. I don't think it's really... Whoever goes is probably just going to face Chet Holmgren and Drew Timme, and it's not going to matter. Now, from the East, I'm going to take UNC. The way they played against Baylor, they looked probably like the best team in the round of 32. They shot well. They produced on the boards. They produced from out back. Everybody there just played very, very well. And if you can keep R.J. Davis shooting that way, he only had 4 points in that first game where they beat Marquette by 40 almost. You talk about him shooting that way, along with Manick not being in the game for the entirety, that team is scary, especially with Bangkok down low. You have all the pieces there. So going over at the South, I'm going to take Houston. I know it's a little bit of a risky pick, but I'm going to take the future Big 12 member in Houston just because of experience. I think they've been here before. They went to the Final Four last year, lost to the ultimate champion Baylor. I'm going to take them. And then the Midwest, Kansas. I think the Midwest is a tricky one because I really feel like it could be Kansas, Iowa State to go to the Final Four.
It's a crapshoot.
Yeah, I really think it could be. So, yeah, I would say that's my Final Four.
You're just trying to make the Big 12 look good by having Houston and KU get in, aren't you?
Well, tell me yours.
So, I have Gonzaga. I think
This is fair.
I think that's fair. I still have my original Final Four from my initial bracket, which is incredible because after that, it's a lot of red. And we're in a bracket group together. I'm dead last. I am dead last.
If it makes you feel better, I'm right above you. So nice.
Yeah. But I have the Zags. Originally, I picked UCLA. I'm gonna stick with it. I think UCLA, like you were talking about with Houston, UCLA's got the experience. All of those guys were basically on that Final Four team just last year, just like Houston. So I think UCLA. I have Arizona coming out of the South. And I understand what you're saying about Houston, and I don't disagree with you at all. I think whoever wins that game is going to the Final Four. Is probably going to win in the Elite Eight. We hope. Yes. But an interesting thing. There's an interesting thing. Since, I think, the last 8 tournaments, so not counting 2020, because we didn't have a tournament, obviously, but the last 8 tournaments, there's been a team seeded 5 or lower that has made the Final Four every year.
I think we could have 2 this year with UNC. And if UCLA beats UNC, I think the real shot, Houston gets in. UNC or Houston, one of them's got to get in, I feel like.
Well, it feels like we usually have a double-digit Final Four seed a lot of the time.
St. Peter's.
Please. The Peacocks to the Final Four. But
your Midwest, what you got there?
I originally picked Kansas. I'm struggling here.
Struggling?
Because I want to take KU. I want to take Iowa State. I want to take all four. I want all four of the Midwest to get to the Final Four. Because Providence would be cool. KU's fine. Iowa State, Miami, great. I'm going to take the Cyclones. I'm going to take the 11 seed. I'm going to take Iowa State because that defense has just been so good. I mean, they held Wisconsin to 49, and they have a player of the year finalist in Johnny Davis.
Iowa State, they played so well at the beginning of the year, and now they're playing well at the end of the year. So I can see definitely. So going to the championship game, I'm going to take the Zags against UNC and Kansas against Houston to have a Zags-Kansas matchup in the championship game.
See, I have Gonzaga, but I have Arizona getting there because they're the two best teams.
I really do agree with that. I just got really concerned by that Arizona TCU game. I got really concerned.
That's fair, but it's March.
It's
like
fair.
you gotta win no matter what. You know what I mean?
It's March.
Absolutely, yes.
Two 1 seeds getting in that's not that probable in terms of men's tournaments. You usually see one.
I mean, you have 2 1 seeds getting in to the Final Four as well.
Moving on. So, okay.
I mean, yeah, I have Gonzaga, Arizona, and I think that we're on a collision course between first-year head coach Tommy Lloyd meeting up
I
with
would love that.
Meeting up with Mark Few. Tommy Lloyd, former assistant of Mark Few at Gonzaga. I think that's the dream matchup. And then it's time. It's time for the mid-majors to rise up, and Gonzaga needs to win it this year. They need to win it this year. They have to win it this year. And I know what you're about to say.
It's not time.
I know.
Kansas and Ochai Agbaji, the Wooden Award winner, will take down Gonzaga in the championship game. I'm going to go 75-68. And
75-68 for you?
75-68 Kansas over Gonzaga.
Tell you what, for my Gonzaga, Arizona, I'm going to go 84-81 because both teams are going to want to score the absolute crap out of that ball. It's going to be a beautiful end to March, regardless of what happens. I cannot wait for it. I'm going to be sitting in front of my couch, in front of my couch, in front of the TV, wherever the TV can be, in front of my eyeballs. That is where I will be watching this tournament. It's going to be beautiful.
Well, there you have it. Gonzaga for Karsten, Kansas for me. And that about covers our analysis and predictions for this year's tournament. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Jace Andrews.
And I'm Karsten Melton. Grab your popcorn or whatever food or beverage you need. These next couple weeks of basketball is going to be an absolute blast. Thank you for watching. As always, go Pokes and go Peacocks.